I had a car like this, the old Ford, and I think I just about hold the record going from Leeton Hospital to Wagga Base Hospital. I was cruising along at around 168 kilometres an hour, and with 3 or 4 nurses in the back and the doctor in the back with a patient that had lost an arm and had it all twisted, another one twisted around 35 times. I joined the ambulance service in 1966, 2 years as a voluntary. Done that for 2 years for nothing. Used to work every weekend, and used to go in after work, and sometimes do it in the morning, sometimes get called out at night, all on a voluntary basis, and finding that people required my services. So then I decided to do my best to become a permanent ambulance officer, because I got to like it so much. And then we'd actually went across to Wagga, and another guy used to take us around looking at houses. We were going to live over there, but it never happened to come about. And then we come back to Leeton, and one of the station officers, new station officer, turned up, which one of the ambulance officers didn't like, so he quit, and they gave me his job. And I was an ambulance officer from that time on, full time. When I was younger, to be honest, I did not know what I was going to do. I used to do a lot of seasonal work, but one day we were laying down underneath the trees, and it was around 114 degrees, and an old uncle out of the army looked at me and said, "Leo," he said, "the best place for you, you know, you'd make a good ambulance officer. He said, you're well built, you're not a bad looking bloke," which I agreed with. I then learnt to become learnt first aid, and I became an ambulance officer. I was 24, 25 years of age at that time. And to get a first aid certificate, I was working at the rice mill, and I used to climb up on top of the bags, and I read the book and learned how to do first aid, and went to classes and become fully qualified. From there, I remember going to my first accident, and I was on my own. My legs were shaking, my arms were shaking, and I got this lady out of a motor vehicle accident. I knew what I had to do, but then when I got back, I realised I had to learn to spell her name. I couldn't, because at that time I did not know how to read and write correctly. And I used to have to ask the nurses how to spell their names and get their addresses. And I went back home to my wife and my children. I said, I have to learn to read and write. So my children and my wife took it in turns of teaching me to read and write. And it blossomed on from there. From there I went to school and went away to ambulance schools in Sydney, and I was lucky enough to be able to qualify and carry on being an ambulance officer. The old fellow that introduced me told me to be an ambulance officer. When we undone it and I become the ambulance officer I was, and dressed in my uniform, my mum just looked at me and smiled. Being an Aboriginal lady, it was all very hard living in those days, and she just looked up at, as though in a spiritual system, looked at her father, my grandfather, and told her we'd got through the cracks to get to where I got to. Because I knew, because when I was signing up for an ambulance officer, the old fellow said to me, whatever you do, do not put down that you were an Aboriginal. Put down Australian, and which I did. And I was very fortunate that's the way it worked out. Because later on in life, I worked for 15 years probably, and I got an accident, and in that accident was a couple of people that had hepatitis B. And all the ambulance personnel had to have injections against that. And when they took mine, mine never took. And the boss man came up to me and he said, Leo, he said, that never took, we're going to have to do it again. So they took another swab of blood. And then he came back the second time, he said, that never took. He said, Leo, he said, I'm going to have to ask you an embarrassing question, mate. He said, you Aboriginal? And I said, yes, I am. And he said,
that's why I never took. And I said to him then, I said, what do they make medicine for white fellas? So they'll live and the black fella, he don't get it. And he said, basically, you think so, wouldn't you? And then after that, my superintendent rang up and said, Leo, I want you to come over here to Wagga. And it was Hilton Proctor. And he was a good mate of mine. I said, what do you want me for? He said, I just want to ask you a question. I said, can't you answer it over the phone? He said, no, come over here. So I went over. And he said, Leo, he said, I want you to ask you a question. Are you an Aboriginal? I said, yes. So I said, why? He said, because if you'd have put that down, you would not have ever got into the ambulance service. And I said, Well, I said, what are you going to do about it? I said, I'm the best one you bloody got. And with a bit of a smile and a bit of a smug face, he said, that's all right, mate. He said, finish your coffee and go back home. He said, we'll sort it all out. And I think it was about 6 weeks later, I got a letter from Superintendent of Sydney Control and asked me would I like to be an Aboriginal liaison officer. So they fitted me in that direction. And I said, what am I supposed to do? And they said, be an Aboriginal liaison officer. So all I could think of was going around teaching Aboriginals first aid to the best of my ability, and wherever they wanted me, they needed me, I was available with my ambulance career and with them. And I lectured from Leeton to Wyandra in Queensland. In different towns I've done lectures on first aid to try and teach not just Aboriginals, but all the locals that come to first aid classes and teach them first aid. This I've done for quite some years. The communication back in the old days with the ambulance was all two-way radios, or it was on the public telephone. The exchange ladies used to give you a ring and tell you you had a job down Brobna Road or such and such a place, and away you'd go, because they got all the directions and that from the persons that rang it in. There was no such thing as 000 or anything like that. They'd just ring for the ambulance services, and the exchange girls would take the call and pass it on to the ambulance station. Thursday nights, we always went up to the police station where we played cards, and sometimes we had to get a prisoner out to take a hand, and we'd sit him over beside the phone. So if the phone went, he used to answer the phone, and if it was for the police, he'd give it to the police, and if it was for the ambulance, he'd give it to me. And that's the way it worked, the communication. But it was, outside that, it was mouth to mouth, and let Jack know, and he'd let Henry know, and it passed on that way. And that's the way it was back in those days. In my day, we worked 24 hours a day, every day, on your own. You never ever had assistance, not another ambulance officer. There was no one around, you done it on your own. I did one day, and the most people I carted in the one accident was 10 people out of the one family. One part of the family was going one way in the car, and the other part of the family, the other half of the family, were in another car going the opposite way, and they hugged the corner and they ran into one another. So in a 1967 Holden station wagon, I put one on the stretcher, a couple on the floor, one on the seat, one on my lap, the baby, and took him to hospital. And dropped them all off, and then dropped back and went back and got the other ones. And I think I'd done 3 trips to get them all into the hospital. And that was a regular thing. You'd always go out on your own. The only one you had out there to help you was your police. If it was an accident scene, then you had rescue, and a couple of rescue. We didn't have rescue back in the early days. We didn't have rescue. That came later on. But mainly you depended on the police being there at the same time as you to give you a hand, especially at an accident scene. But if it was a normal house call out, you were on your own, Pat Malone. There one night I got called out to go to Stony Point, and they told me they'd leave the light on. It was 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning, and they'd leave the light on so I'd be able to find the house. And I went out there, and I think there's about 500 houses out there, and they all had their lights on. But we finally found them and transported them in. But you do all your loading, and pick them up and put them on the stretcher on your own. Some of the vehicles, one was a Tarago, which was my favourite car. I used to drive it and do long distance runs in it, especially hospital transfers. I'd take a patient from Leeton to Melbourne or Leeton to Sydney, turn around, leave Sydney and come back again and be all in the Tarago, because in those days you could zip along a little bit better. It was quite a comfortable car to ride in, but it was unfortunately it was only a one stretcher car. And we did have a couple of Hollands. We had a old Ford Fairlane, and then we eventually got to an F100, which held the 4 stretchers. We decided then that we required another car, and of course those days you had to raise the money to buy these sort of equipment yourself. And I was very fortunate. I had a mate that was a bookie, and he said, "Leo, I'll raise the money for you if you want." He said, "You get permission from the police and we'll run a 2-up game at the ambulance station," and which we'd done. We run 2-up every Thursday night at the ambulance station for nearly 6 months. I'd go and see the police sergeant first, get his permission, tell him that it's all clear, and he'd bring in the blokes from Albury, Sydney, Temora, Wagga. They all come, the punters all come in, and he supplied them all. And he'd put his hand on when the bookie would put his win a bet, he'd reach over and just grab a handful of notes and just throw them in his bag, and that money went towards an ambulance. And it took us just over 3 months, and we had the money for a new F100. I did ring my superintendent to state what we were going to do, and he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "We're going to raise money for a new F100. He said, "How are you going to do that? What are you talking about?" I said, "Okay, sir, leave it be with me." And that was my superintendent, J.K. Bradford at that time. He was a top bloke. And after the 6 months, we rang him up, 3 months, we rang him up and said, "Mate, there's $36,000 sitting in our bank, in our safe. If you want it, what do we do with it?" He was over that afternoon and picked it all up. We counted it out and put it all up and took it back, and probably a couple of months later we got a new F100, so we finished up with 2. So we finished up with 2 F100s and a Ford Fairlane and 1 Holden. We've done a lot of lucky envelopes. We've done a lot of chocolate wheels, raffles of all shapes and sizes, billy cart racing down the hill. Some used to bet on them and so forth, etc., but all the money was raised was to buy our equipment and also to help with our wages. And if they never had the money for the wages, it was never a problem. We never ever got paid overtime in those days because they never had the money to pay us. And if I worked any time over my normal 40 working hours, all that time was all free. And I run that Leeton station on my own for 6 months at a time, at different times. I'd work 7 days a week, 7 nights a week, and without a day off, and only ever got paid me normal wages. And that all the other ambulance personnel in my era, they all done the same thing, because anybody who wanted us, we were always available if somebody required. And I think one of the most important parts of me in that ambulance, and one of the proudest moments, I'd say, when the ambulance organisation was known as one of the most trusted organisations in the world. And when they put that up and put it over, the chest went out and the shoulders stood up straight. And I was a very, very proud man at that time. And I think I went from an Aboriginal to a white at that day. And I learnt to soon live, and I could live both ways regardless of which way it was. But, and I went home to Mum and I told my mum. She was awfully proud, with a big smile on her face. And she was always proud for me to be where I was at that time. The whole family have been proud all the way through. My children often talk about me. My wife always talks about me. Now there's only 3 of us left of our era, of Mum's sisters and all the other ones of my age. They're all passed on. And there's me and my younger brother, and he's 80, and and I've got a cousin that's 82, 83. No, she's 84, she's a year older. Left of our era. And today, my children have I've gone around from my grandfather's days, because he was an Aboriginal. He was born on Warringazda and died on Warringazda. And he used to write into the government to allow black kids to go to school. And after a couple of years of writing, he did that. And as a turnaround, my eldest daughter went to university and finally come back right around to the fact that she was the director of the New South Wales Education Department. And she got out grandfather's letters out of the archives and notified and used to lecture the government on those letters, and which was a very special thing for the family, for it to go away when they weren't allowed to go to school, to me going to school, to my children going to school, and becoming and doing what they are today. I think one of the proudest moments was in the service when Sir Roden Cutler gave me a presentation as he was the representative of the Queen for my dedication in doing first aid classes of St John's first aid classes to the public, and given me that sort of award. And I think to stand up above all and in front of my mum as an ambulance officer, be black or white, it didn't really matter at that time. It was something very special to me. Well, one of the things that I'm really proud about is the fact that I am the only Aboriginal to have been recorded into the ambulance service at this period of time. And that as an Aboriginal, to make the magazine, I thought I'd get a little clip, and to have 3 pages of my story put in the magazine from an Aboriginal point of view, I would say would be one of my proudest moments, to have it out in the open, completely out in the open, because a lot of people did not know whether I was black or whether I was white. And to me, I was very fortunate that I did have white skin and had the Aboriginal blood flow through my veins. Yeah, would have been one of my proudest moments, to have that magazine story on it. My mob are from Warringazda at Darlington Point. Off the Warringazda mission, my grandfather and grandmother were, my grandfather was bred and born on the Warringazda Aboriginal mission back in the 20s, and my grandma, she come down, she was taken from the Cowra mission and brought down to Warringazda mission, where she met my grandfather, and they married from there, and that's where I come from. And we still go out to visit today, now and again. Being an Aboriginal and being into the ambulance service, that we have found a era of where now we do, because in the service, in the ambulance service, it was always the odd person committing suicide. And I said to another good friend of mine, Baden Maiden, I said, mate, we've got to do something for all these ones that are passing on who commit suicide. And I said, I think it's time we had a dinner and we all got together. And he said, it's a bloody good idea. So we wrote letters out and rang up everybody and said, to all the ambulance personnel that had retired, and asked them would they like to come to a dinner. And quite a few, about 60 turned up. The suicides, they stopped. And we thought, wow, this is great. And we never worried about it. We've done it for about 12 months, 2 years, and nobody suicided again. And my mate Baden, he got crook. And I come back to his place, probably about 6 months later. And I walked in, I was surprised. Baden was on, well, I just forget what sort of a treatment they called it. And his face was blowing up, and he said to me, Leo, I'd sooner be asleep than be awake. And I said, Baden, we're going to start them dinners back up, mate. And I said, what we will do, I said, we'll get those letters, I'll come back tomorrow, we'll do those letters. I said, and get them letters out and get them everybody to come back. He said, I'll give you the addresses now. I said, no, I'll be back tomorrow. We went home and I said, and then next morning the phone went, me and Doreen discussed it. And I woke up in the morning, we had a phone call, and Joy, Baden's wife, said, Leo, don't worry about coming back over. Baden's hung himself. I said to Doreen, I said, I got those bloody letters off him and addresses off him. She said he gave them to me last night. So we copied out those letters and we got them all sent out. And I said, instead of having a meeting once a year, we always say that it was great that we kept it started and we'll keep it going for as long as possibly can. And hopefully it never happens again. So I'd say one of my proudest moments, the probably proudest moment of starting up those dinners and to save the lives of other retired ambulance personnel. Most definitely.